If Trump wants a successful presidency, don't sign on to this idiocy. Do your job, Mr. President. Make peace in the region.
Jeffrey Sachs recently went on the Breaking Points podcast to talk a little bit about the supposed culmination of Israel and the United States' recent war versus Iran, what we can take from it, the most horrifying consequences of it, and whether this ceasefire will hold and how it might be broken. So let's watch and let's react. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
First, let's just start off with the insanity of the last 24 hours. I know you've been monitoring, quote, the situation, as all of us have, and we just want to get your reaction to the broader ramifications of this ceasefire, at least for now, between Israel and Iran, and the role here of the United States.
Well, this has been an absolutely wild week. In a way, it is Bibi's fulfillment of a 30-year mission to try to drag the United States into a war with Iran. This latest episode has been part of a long-term idea of Netanyahu, which is we're going to do what we want in Gaza, the West Bank. We're going to control everything. We'll kill. We'll have a genocide. And anyone that objects, any other country in the region, well, we'll overthrow that government. That's been the basic strategy for 30 years. For 30 years, the United States has gone along with that strategy, whether it is in Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Sudan, Libya, and Iran was always the big prize. So Netanyahu's been absolutely itching for a big war with Iran, trying to drag the U.S. in. And what we saw last week probably was the great battle inside between the deep state, which is absolutely in line with Mossad. It's basically a Mossad CIA operation for 30 years, and MAGA, which says, stop, we're sick of this.
Yeah, I basically agree with him. I think he used the 30 years figure because that signifies how long almost the clean break strategy has been around. And what that was a 1996 memo that Wesley Clark blew the cover off in, I believe, 2003 when he was running for president, that said that the United States was planning 7 regime change operations within 5 years. The last one on that list was Iran. All 6 others have already happened, and Netanyahu has been agitating for this forever. And what the clean break strategy represents is the fact that Israel wouldn't continue along the path that they mostly had been on since the Oslo agreements, and that was, let's maybe try to make peace with our neighbors. No, the clean break strategy says we're not going to make peace with our neighbors. We're going to make it impossible for there to be a Palestinian state, and we're going to throw our weight around in the region and involve the United States. So that's what we're dealing with now. I think that has completely come to fruition, especially in the last few decades.
We're sick of these wars. The president, I don't know where he is because I haven't checked my my social media for the last 30 seconds, but he's been on both sides of this. But his base has been saying, do not do this, do not do this. Whereas Netanyahu has been saying next year in Tehran, or his ministers have been putting that out in disgusting vulgarity. So I don't know whether this is going to stop, but this is a battle of a long-term strategy of Netanyahu, remake the Middle East to give basically complete, total impunity to Israel to do every murder, massacre, genocide that it wants to do. And some of us who think that's not making the world a better place.
Yeah, totally. I will add, too, that this only encourages Iran to develop nuclear weapons. So it really seems counterintuitive to answer the war propaganda that the regime was spewing about this war based upon what happened. We know the strikes weren't successful, at least to the extent that Trump had trumped them up, pardon the pun, and Hegseth had, the whole mission accomplished thing. And it really was reminiscent of George W. Bush on that aircraft carrier underneath the banner that said, mission accomplished, a few months into the Iraq war or whatever it was, let alone we were to endure a 20-year occupation and just disaster in Iran after that point. And, I will question his assertion that the MAGA base was against this. A lot of it was, but you could see a lot of hardcore influencers on Twitter, the most passionate ones, really backing Trump every step of the way, moving the goalpost. We went from, we're going to negotiate with Iran. Yeah, woohoo. Then we were like, Iran can't have a nuclear weapon. Yeah, Iran can't have a nuclear weapon. And then it was, well, Israel's doing these strikes on their own. It's like they cheered for that. Then it was, oh, the United States did bomb some sites, but it was awesome. And then it was float regime change out there. Yeah, maybe why shouldn't there be a regime change? So every step of the way, some of Trump's supporters were just blanket backing that. If you follow social media, a lot of people will probably know who those voices are, but it wasn't the entire MAGA movement that opposed it. A lot of it did. A lot of the base certainly did, though.
That's not helping anything, and it's not making America more secure.
Yeah.
Thanks God, if this ceasefire holds, that's a good thing. That's the bottom line.
Yeah. Professor, let's pull on that thread a little bit more of the Israelis. As you mentioned, this has been a multi-decade project of Netanyahu specifically, but it's broadly supported with the Israeli public and certainly with his entire coalition, including literal terrorists that are involved in his government. So he's not going to give up and just say, okay, ceasefire, and now we have peace with Iran. That is certainly not going to happen. So what do you expect to see based on previous historical actions from the Israelis? What do you expect the Israelis to do next to try to play their next card to get us drawn in yet again?
Well, the Israelis will make new provocations. That's for sure. They will make arguments that now we see the perfidy of Iran, or for whatever argument to keep drawing us in. I have said for years, I think decades now, that the main job of the president of the United States in modern times is to keep the foot on the brake of the war machine, because it's always revving. If you went to the deep state in the last few days, I think bombing missions against Iran are just splendid. Let's try out those B-2s. Let's see how the bunker busters do. And going beyond that, the regime change, well, that was in half the tweets of the last, or social truth posts of the last few days. So I think that Israel will provoke, and it is the job of the United States, when in rare moments presidents do their job, to keep the foot on the brake. And this morning, Trump unusually chastised Israel in a post saying, "Do not drop that bomb." Well, actually, that's his job. It's pretty interesting.
And they still drop the bomb anyways. Some people are talking about, well, he was so enraged by Israel. Well, he was actually, kind of incensed by both sides, at least if you listen to that entire statement. And it doesn't indicate like he's seriously going against Israel. If he was, he would threaten to withhold aid. They won't do that. He's owned by AIPAC and the Israel lobby. That hasn't happened. But it is good to see that rare moment of frustration come out, because he was told by both sides, apparently, that, this thing's going to be over. We're going to abide by the terms. And, at that point, I think reason spoke to him to some extent. We want to get out of this thing. So that was a moment of frustration. But I think Sachs is absolutely right. Israel will continue to clamor for this cause, continue to draw the United States in, and hope that a president is willing to go one step deeper than Trump went, and into full-bore regime change. It's what Mark Levin's been calling for forever, Ben Shapiro, all the neocon hardliners, and Netanyahu. He's wanted it for 30 years. He said explicitly he wants the Libya model there. That was the overthrow of Gaddafi. And it's going to be the job of a U.S. president to keep the United States out. Now, the propaganda they're going to use is probably going to be from the same playbook that we're all sick of. In fact, like the death to America chants and Iran's this close to a nuclear weapon. It's like the Middle East version of the fine people hoax that's just repeated over and over and over. And they expect people to buy in over and over and over. And I hope Americans wake up to it.
We did it this time. Yesterday was different. We'll see what happens tomorrow.
So one of the things I'm curious about, sir, you're obviously always looked at the bigger picture, and there was a lot made potentially of Russia and China coming in on Iran's side. That didn't materialize to a major extent, but there were at least some entanglements. We can put this one up on the screen. For example, former President Medvedev of Russia at one point basically threatened, basically said the Americans have accomplished nothing in their strikes. Potentially we could transfer nukes to them. He walked it back a little bit later. later, saying a number of countries are ready to directly supply Iran with their own nuclear warheads, but then he walked it back later. What do you make, though, of how the Russians and the Chinese will respond to what's transpired in the last 12 days?
Yeah, I think, by the way, what Medvedev was saying in that point number 3 was not Russia transferring nuclear arms or endorsing that, but the fact that Pakistan is a country closely aligned with the Islamic cause, obviously, and with Iran.
Yeah, I question that a little bit. I do think that might be what Medvedev was alluding to. You know, it's been reported that he's talking about Russia giving Iran nukes, which he doesn't say that. But Pakistan is a predominantly Sunni country, a little bit different culture, and not so closely aligned with the Shiite Iranians that it's possible they're another Muslim country in the region. But Iran has floated out the notion of a non-nuclear Middle East. Like, it would sign into an agreement where there would be no countries within the Middle East with nukes. And that's something Israel cannot agree to because it has a secret nuclear weapon program. They maintain both that, whoa, we don't talk about that. We don't know what the nuclear program is. But everyone knows they got nukes from the United States, and they don't want a non-nuclear Middle East because it would be forced to give up their nukes that everyone knows they have. It's the worst kept secret in geopolitics, and that's the bottom line.
And absolutely able to transfer nuclear weapons. North Korea is another case. And I think that's an important point, by the way, because we've been told that the be-all and end-all is Iran's enrichment of uranium. That is not the true issue at stake here. The true issue at stake is Israel vulnerable by its own actions to a nuclear attack on Israel? The answer is yes. Does Israel create more security for itself the way that it operates? My answer is no. It makes Israel more and more dangerous. Not only did we see, obviously, that the Iron Dome ain't so iron, and that there were easily, it was not hard to penetrate the air defenses in Israel. But Israel seems to think that Iran is the end of the story, and it is not the end of the story. There are 57 countries in the Organization of Islamic Cooperation that are absolutely dead set against what Israel is doing. The vast majority of the world is dead set against it. When you ask about Russia and China, it is their fundamental purpose not to be thrown under the bus of the United States. This is the basic point. They want a multipolar world, not a U.S.-dominated world.
Yeah, what that means is that this incident, in addition to all the other U.S. foreign policy blunders, including the proxy war in Ukraine, means that Russia is pulled closer to China in a bond. They're both BRICS countries already, but they both sense the antagonism of the U.S. toward them in many regards, beefing up military presence not only in Ukraine, Eastern Europe, NATO expansion throughout the decades, militarization of the Pacific, and the naval forces there that the U.S. has done in recent years to a degree it's never done before. So that is the effect. And I actually kind of wonder that, you know, the next kind of propaganda stage in this whole war propaganda campaign for war against Iran, and ultimately, as the neocons want regime change in Iran, is to say, well, you know, even Medvedev floated out that they could get nukes from somewhere else. So it doesn't matter that they can't deliver nukes. They have no delivery mechanism like a ballistic missile or, you know, a nuclear submarine that could shoot one off and have a mushroom cloud around New York. They'll just get it from some other power, you know, use another power as a proxy to attack America, and then we're all threatened. That could be the next phase of this war propaganda campaign, because death to America chants is essentially the right-wing version of saying words are violence. It doesn't correspond with Iranian actions, if anything, anything but, because they were remarkably restrained and even tipped Trump off to their retaliation strike. It was just to save face. They didn't act the way that the neocons always said they would and try to wipe Israel off the map, even when pushed into the corner.
And they are succeeding in that because the U.S. does not have the means, the power, in my view, the interest, but put that aside, the means or the power to make a U.S.-dominated world, despite what Washington has believed for more than 30 years. So Russia and China are careful China's very precise. I think it's a cliche, but it's also true that Russia plays chess, China plays Go, and the United States plays poker. One hand at a time, very quick, not any long-term strategy, just go for the hand.
I like that.
I think that China and Russia bided their time in the first days. But the point was really, Iran was not decapitated and with regime change, nor was it stopped in its ability to do great damage inside Israel up until the very last moment, which really irks the Israelis that it was the last exchange of missiles in this case was Iran's. And then Israel tried to violate the timeline and launch another one so it could be last. And that's when Trump said, no, stop. We already have an understanding about the chronology. So we are watching step by step the emerging of a true multipolar world where other powers that don't love the United States, they don't hate it, by the way, they just don't want to be subservient to it.
Yeah, and if you're part of the deep state and military industrial complex and, neocon apparatus, your default view is to think that all these other countries are innately the enemy. But they're not. They just see what the United States does, ultimately on behalf of Israel, especially in the Middle East, but also in Ukraine and, other parts of the world where the U.S. is militarizing, pushing their weight around, empire building, foreign bases in every corner of the known world. And they don't want that to be the case. They don't want the U.S. to intrude upon their regions and impose upon them through coercion in various ways, sanctioning regimes, getting into proxy wars like Ukraine, etc. So, Jeffrey Sachs is absolutely right here. And what's the lesson that, the Iranians take from all this? I think it's the same lesson that, we all observed when it came to the regime change in Libya. It's that get a nuclear weapon as soon as possible because then the U.S. won't mess with you. That's what North Korea did. Gaddafi gave up his nuclear weapon program in the mid-2000s. Bush boasted about it. He said, Libya joins a new rank of nations, in modern, the modern coalition of nations or something. There was a famous speech that he did on this. And then the U.S. led a coup to overthrow him, support rebels, and he died in a very barbaric way that I won't detail here because it's so crazy. But that's what befalls countries that actually give their weapons up. If I'm Iran, there's nothing disincentivizing me from getting a nuke. That's for sure.
They have nuclear arms, powerful weapons, the technologies that we have so that we can't dominate. And Iran is a regional power. It's not a pushover for Israel by any means. There was no one strike and it's all over. One of the things that may have happened last week, I don't know, of course, but Netanyahu, telling Trump, we can do it, we can do it, we can do it. And they did their decapitation, murders. Mossad really is a murder machine, of course.
Yeah, first target was residential district to take out some of the top brass. Of course, you don't hear about all the innocents that happen to die in those complexes outside of Iran's top brass. And that was the first strike in this campaign. And that's the gambit that Netanyahu used to try to lure the United States into it and use our boots on the ground to enact the regime change. He didn't get that. Neocons are beside themselves. Mark Levin is melting down on Twitter over it. He can't take the fact that regime change didn't come to fruition. And I love that part of it. The worst scenario didn't play out, but this solves nothing. Innocents died on both sides for such a stupid display of violence. And, innocents get caught up in these things all the time, and there's a human cost to all this that rarely gets noticed.
And it did its decapitation strike, and it did not bring down the regime. And so it probably led Trump and people around him to say, come on, the Israelis have given us a bunch of BS on this. It didn't change the regime. It didn't end the threats. And I think that's when Trump heard his base calling. He heard common sense calling. And he said, look, this isn't going according to plan. And I think the main point is with Russia and China, they were cautious, but they weren't letting Iran fall by any means. And if Iran were to be facing a more cataclysmic set of events in the last few days, I think the reactions also would have been different.
Interesting.
Yeah, I agree with them. The other thing to note is that this shows that the U.S. is willing to allow its own foreign policy objectives to be undermined by the Israelis because Trump played along with this for at least several days leading up to it. And we knew that this could be coming. We've heard about this story in the news for several months. There was a story a few months back that, Trump stopped a war with Iran. There was, New York Times and other big corporate media articles about that. And, it sounded like there was a rift in his cabinet. Well, it ultimately did come to fruition. And it telegraphs to the world that the United States government doesn't deal in good faith. So what does that tell the Russians when we're trying to negotiate peace in Ukraine? Or at least that's the ostensible version of what Trump says. Surrounding yourself with Keith Kellogg in diplomatic arrangements doesn't seem to be the best way to make that happen, if you ask me.
To your point about perhaps the Israelis were selling, and perhaps they even believed that they would be able to, create a regime collapse in short time. The Washington Post got a hold of this leaked audio of Mossad agents calling Israeli generals and saying, you have 12 hours or else we're going to murder you and your wife and kids, by the way. And if you want to avoid that fate, you need to record yourself surrendering. You need to film this surrender video and send it to us, which of course would have been used as propaganda by the Israelis. And as best we know, not one of them did that, which I think, in and of itself is an indication that they may have miscalculated the strength of this regime, especially once a country is bombed, like it's very common for people to rally around the flag.
I think they do it. It's actually because of what Crystal said. They were the first ones struck. So they're naturally going to rally around the government to support it, just like when the United States was struck during 9/11. What happened? Well, that exploded Bush's popularity, gave him unlimited political capital at the time. And I say that with the most chagrin imaginable because that's what led to the DHS being created, the Patriot Act to be pushed, the early beginnings of the NSA mass data collection series, and of course wars in both Afghanistan and Iraq. So yeah, that's exactly what happens when your country's attacked. Then that is what, brings solidarity often in the favor of the regime. Now, that won't happen when the people rise up and overtake it, but that will happen when you are clearly targeted by a violent attack like Israel did to Iran. So I'm with Crystal.
But I wanted to ask you, with regards to Israel, so they have bombed, they're committing a genocide in Palestine, in the Gaza Strip. They bombed Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, Iran, Iraq, and are a nuclear-armed nation outside of the NPT, did have a secret nuclear weapons program and, are a rogue nation, I think, by any characterization at this point. Is there going to be any consequence for them? Like, is there any sort of longer-term consequence for the fact that they have behaved in this outrageous, barbaric fashion over years at this point? And, really made themselves a villain in terms of the eyes of much of the world?
I think Israel is in its worst insecurity in its history by far, because it is utterly isolated in the international system. I'm sitting just outside the UN. I've been attending UN Security Council meetings, UN General Assembly sessions. You have 95% of the world population voting against Israel right now. You have an overwhelming call for the absolutely practical state of Palestine being established on the borders of the 4th of June, 1967, and Israel learning finally, after decades and decades, it's just going to have to live alongside the Palestinian people who have the same number population as the Israeli Jews. And this is the most basic point of all. Israel has no security from all of this. It has achieved nothing except a wasteland in its neighborhood. And if it wants security, the only security is to rejoin the family of nations. And the way to do that is straightforward. It's according to international law. It's according to basic common sense. It's according to decency. It's according to endless resolutions of the UN Security Council and the UN General Assembly. And that is that there would be a state of Palestine for the Palestinian people alongside a state of Israel. And President Trump actually can make that happen. If he wants his Nobel Peace Prize, it's not by this ceasefire after this behavior of the last week. It is by a Palestinian state being established. How does that happen? One vote change in the UN Security Council. The U.S. vetoed this.
And the U.S. will always veto it. It doesn't really seem like a realistic prospect now, I hate to say. I think he's right, and ultimately I don't think many good political, there's many good political solutions to anything, but one of the best is political decentralization, and this would be political decentralization of Israel into 2 states rather than 1. The Israelis have resisted this for decades. Netanyahu has even supported Hamas financially, including 2 weeks before October 11th through an agent in Qatar. He sent the head of Mossad to exchange money to continue funding for Hamas because he believed that that would destabilize the Palestinians. It would lead to kind of chaos and making it seem like there's no realistic party to even negotiate this with. And that's ultimately, paid off for him. I hate to say is that strategy has worked. So I'm all for Sachs' solution. It's much better than what we're dealing with now. It just doesn't seem that realistic. I hope someday it will be.
Last year, when it came to a vote in the Security Council, which is the part of the UN system or the international system that establishes the statehood membership in the UN, all the United States has to do is to say, we go along with all the rest of the world and tell Israel, wake up, we're saving you. We're not hurting you. We are saving you from yourself, however. It's just crazy what Israel's doing. And the idea that this is any security, I think they should understand that with apartment buildings in Beersheba being destroyed, with Haifa being attacked, with Tel Aviv being attacked, with the countries outside of the region like Pakistan and DPRK watching, if Israel thinks it has any security at all from its brazenness, it should think again.
Yeah, I'm with him. Israel should know that they live in a multipolar Middle East and multipolar world, just as the United States should learn that. My criminal government should learn that too. To not believe that we're sitting here in 1991 in a unipolar world thinking that stuff like the Iraq invasion, the first one, is a good idea, because it wasn't. Then thinking that, Somalia, and I believe 93 was a good excursion. It wasn't. Then the Balkan Wars was a good idea. No, it wasn't. Actually, that antagonized Russia. That was, one of the biggest, acts of aggression upon the U.S. relationship with Russia at that time. And they had just shut down the Soviet Union. So, yeah, the United States and Israel both has to learn that, and otherwise they're going to get bogged down in these wars, and there'll be proxy wars on the other side. Russia will continue to aid Iran or, all their other proxies, and it's going to be a slog. It's going to, exacerbate the potential of these long-term proxy wars that never work out for the benefit of the taxpayers and just exist to launder money to the military-industrial complex.
And by the way, what we saw in the Mossad tape, which is chilling, of course, to listen to, is that Mossad became a killing machine. It's very skillful at mass murder, I would say. Not mass murder in the sense that the murder of the leadership of the Iranian military last week. Yes, that's Mossad's business. But to have that as your centerpiece of statehood, to be murder incorporated, is not going to get you safety or security or any sound sleep any day in your life. Israel needs to rethink fundamentally this Bibi strategy, which goes back to 1996 when he first became prime minister.
Yeah, Israel's attracted the ire and indignation of the world for what they're doing in Gaza. There's no way to hide that. I think Netanyahu thought he could hide that by, this rogue strike on Iran for a while, but eyes will go back to that. And public opinion has turned on that massively. And international opinion has too. I don't care as much about that or the international consensus. I just think it's murderous anyways. From an America First position, we shouldn't be supporting that. It's wrong-headed, and I have the same opinion as people like Ron Paul and Dennis Kucinich and Thomas Massie and Rand Paul on this. Stop supporting it. I wouldn't care so much about what Israel's doing if you sever our relationship with Israel completely. Let them do what they want on their own terms. You know, I'll have moral judgments on it. I hate to see the innocent loss of life, but I don't want my government and my tax money to be complicit with that.
And I think to your point, they're not going to rethink it because the public is broadly supportive of the BB strategy. It has to be forced upon them. And the United States of America can do that if there is any will to do it.
Yeah.
It depends always. It has always depended on the United States going along. By the way, people should get online if they haven't done it recently and look at Netanyahu's speech to the U.S. Congress in 2002, telling them how wonderful the Iraq war is going to be. Oh, it's a cakewalk.
Yeah, I'm paraphrasing, but he literally sat there as a regional expert and said, I can guarantee you amazing reverberations of freedom will break out in the region. That's exactly what he says. Go back to that video. It will lead to a freer Middle East is what he was saying. Of course, that was disastrous and totally smashed that perception.
It's going to inspire the whole region.
Yeah,
this man is nuts. He's a failure for 30 years. He's the biggest warmonger on the planet. If Trump wants a successful presidency, don't sign on to this idiocy. Do your job, Mr. President. Make peace in the region. That has to be, you give the state of Palestine alongside the state of Israel, stop the genocide, and go along with international law. It's pretty straightforward. It's there for the taking.